Hello everybody, my name is Swaggy and let's do some data analysis. For this video, I want to talk about WGP Singapore Season 1. For me personally, I went X2 insanely quickly and then I just went to eat Jollibee for lunch. I played Magnolia Phantom and no, it wasn't a good idea. I literally sleeved Aichi the night before. I don't know why I wasn't playing that, the deck is a lot better. But nevertheless, aside from me, there were a total of 695 players there in total. So I thought that this would be a great case study into the Set 14 metagame. I also wanted to use this video and this event as kind of a primer into how you can prepare for a larger tournament. A lot of players who watch me, I think, are more of the casual side, casual competitive side, who kind of want to take the next step into competitive play to know what the good decks are and how to have a good read on the metagame. So I hope that I can use this case study of an event as a way for you to further your growth as a player. Keep in mind, I'm a bum. The only top I have is literally on this channel, so I am not the end-all be-all of advice. But at the very least, I like to keep discussion active and try my best to help you get to the next stage in competitive play. Whether that is just to go one more round with your pet deck, or to make it the top cut, or to win the whole thing, I just want you to be where you want to be. I want you to just be very happy with where you are in Cardfight Vanguard. Although for the most part, if you want to top the whole thing, you probably already have a regiment and know what to do, so think of this as kind of a refresher course. I'm going to be doing a few things this video. Of course, I'm going to go over some of the stats which you see on your screen already. This is because we have a very comprehensive Google Sheet for this event. Shout out to the people who did it. I'll leave a link in the description as to where you can find it. I also want to look at some of the topping decks and the decks that I think are good case studies. And I'm also going to use these as segues into discussing what are the decks you want to prepare for and what are the decks you want to have an understanding of before you go into big events. In doing so, I think that this can help you achieve the results you want to achieve. Again, not all of us are going to aim to top every event. Again, some of us are a lot more casual and just want to dip our toes into competitive play. Some of us are very competitive but just don't have a lot of time to dedicate to Vanguard but still want to know how they can best maximize the limited time they have to achieve the best results possible. So, I hope to help you guys with that. Firstly, let's look at the overall play rates of each deck. Overall play rates are a very important metric because while not every player makes it the top cut or even wants to, most players are going to be playing the early rounds, so this is going to be reflective of the decks that you are going to face. With that in mind, the Aichi icon, Kai icon, and Odium are your top picks, and then we have our Yakuza, our Deeplands, our Lurus a little bit below. So first, we need to understand, why are people even playing these decks? A lot of it may seem like it's because these decks are strong, but you can already see on your screen that it doesn't mean that just because everyone is playing it, means that all these decks are going to do well. So at the very least, for Alfred, Draconic Overlord, and Liao Odium, I can probably guess that regardless of the actual power these decks have, these decks have very high play rates because they have very strong introductory segues. They have very competent sealed products that make developing these decks very easy, from the breakaway start decks to the master deck set. Not to mention, there is a lot of anime popularity. Obviously, Odium is a fan favorite deck, so it's pretty likely that a lot of people are very attached to the character, and thus with the master deck set, they can finally build her. As for Alfred and Draconic Overlord, a lot of people do remember these from the original show. You know, for the icon decks in Singapore at least, a lot of people grew up on that show when it played on Octo, which is a free TV channel everyone had access to, I believe. And the cards also have a really high perceived power level, so a lot of people are kind of fulfilling like childhood dreams and also playing decks they remember from their childhood, and thus these decks are going to see a lot more play, even if their objective power may not exactly be one-to-one with how they perceive it. It's just something fun to do. These decks also have very high perceived strengths. Draconic Overlord, for instance, had a lot of discussion about it when it was being revealed, being doomed as one of basically the best decks in the room, basically too strong for the current metagame. And Liao Odium obviously has things like its Divine Skill Turn, which makes its perceived power seem a lot higher because when that wins, it really wins. But does it mean that these three decks at the top of the pie chart, does it mean that their actual power level is very high? Well, maybe not. If we as a player base were as good as identifying powerful decks as we think we are, then Draconic Overlord would be the second best converted deck, right? But obviously, it isn't. Draconic Overlord has 0 tops in this format. 0. People doomed about this deck for months. I sold my house to buy SP bars and now they're all worthless. In all seriousness, this is a good point to study/analyze. What happens when you have decks like Overlord in the format? This deck very clearly does not have the same sauce as something like Alfred, as Yakuza, as Deeplands. So are you as a player, are you going to prepare for it? Think of it in this way. If you make it the top cut, you will never see Overlord again. In top 32, you just don't see him. So maybe we make the assumption that this deck just isn't very good, and thus we pick a deck that can beat the rest of the playing field, but will maybe struggle with Overlord, for example, thanks to its double persona rides and powerful early game. You know, Tejas Jaren is the strongest early column in the game and comes pre-packaged in every trial deck. And then aside from that, the next best early is like Aichi Icon if they draw quite well. So maybe because you know Overlord's not going to be too big of a threat, you cut down on the restand heals, and then you know maybe you fare better into something like Alfred or Deeplands. That does seem decent at first glance. But because its play rate is so high, you're still going to have to deal with these chumps even at lower tables. If everyone at this event decided not to prepare for Dragonic Overlord and people still brought the deck, Overlord is going to top. Yes, the deck is kind of telegraphed, so knowing its numbers and pressure points will make it easy to deal with, but if no one decides to deal with it, then we would all see it do better. So that's kind of a weird dilemma you have, right? The deck is theoretically not strong enough to make it all the way, but if you don't account for the deck at all, it will go all the way. So here's my advice. If you are a player looking to do just a bit better than the last run, I personally look to identify decks like Overlord and not over-test for them. Again, this is with the assumption that you have very limited time and you can't dedicate too much time to Cardfight Vanguard because you have things like a job maybe. Some decks just have a lot of hype around them that doesn't match their actual power. This can be due to things like anime notoriety, obviously Dragonic Overlord is an anime deck, and historical influence like people still playing something like Heart Luru or Buff Sagura because it was good in the past, but now it just isn't. With that in mind, you should have a basic understanding of these game plans so that you can adjust for them in play, but you shouldn't have to invest so much of your time, rigorously testing the matchup because their actual potency may not be as high as the hype may lead you to believe. If you recall back in DZ-BT14, another example of this was Leonon Tramond, who I think was a deck you should prepare for, but also its actual power relative to its play rate is really bad. If you recall, in like the first WGP of that season, Leonon had a crazy high play rate and then one guy converted into top cut. That's awful for the deck. But if everyone just let Leonon coast on by and didn't prepare for her, she wouldn't dominate. Theoretically anyways. Now I don't think Overlord is as bad as Leonon Tramond was in her debut, rest in peace. But the point is that you should either have enough testing or some decent enough game sense to be able to cut through all the noise at your locals or online discussions to know what decks are really worth planning your own deck around and to play around. Take a lot of these hype decks and doomer decks with just a pinch of salt. Especially if something like anime or pet deckers lead the conversation, because these people have a bit of a bias. Not to say they're necessarily wrong, but they may overvalue or undervalue certain aspects of the deck. For my main point, for most of the players in my audience, I would recommend that play rate is a good metric for knowing if you should dedicate time to learning the deck at all. Think of it as like the breadth of decks that you have to test for. And then the conversion rate, which you can see on screen right now, or like the conversion rate that you think a deck will have, should be the depth of time that you spend on the deck. So, in this format, I know that I'm going to run into decks like Overlord, Aichi, Deeplands, Yakuza, and Odium. These are some of the big ones. So, I want to get a good sensing of these decks' power. I need to know what their cards do. I need to know how my deck manages theirs to some degree. I need to understand basic things like guarding patterns and when to best take damage. And even though some of these lists don't end up converting very well, it's still reasonable to learn about them. Just don't put too much time into learning about them if you can identify early on that, hey, this deck probably isn't as good as other people may be talking about them. Like maybe you don't have to dedicate too much time to Heart Luru because the deck is a little bit more simplistic and you need to know little things like, they need a cat to countercharge, therefore you can kind of damage deny them pretty safely, for example. Maybe you want to pick a deck that does decent into prison because even though it doesn't convert very well, if you keep playing decks that lose to prison, the moment you run into one of the 15 prison players at this event, you're gonna get smoked. Again, it doesn't mean you need to go very in-depth or plan your run around these decks in the same way that I would tell you to plan your run around seeing Yakuza, but it means you should have a way to play to come out on top if you find these a little bit more rogue strategies. And if you play a deck with adequate power to deal with these decks, it's likely you can deal with some of the more weird decks like Hexa Orb or Sacrifice Glass, which are super uncommon and not worth dedicating your time to learning the matchup if time is that limited. Before the video continues, I just want to advertise, I do have a Ko-Fi. I'm not going to paywall any content, obviously I don't really have a lot to paywall, but if you'd like to support the channel and what I do and you want to see me, maybe try to upload a bit more regularly, maybe improve this microphone of mine, then any help would be appreciated. You don't have to donate, just want to put it out there in case you do want to support the channel and what I do. Okay, back to the video. Okay, now that we've looked at the overall play rates, I think we can move on to Top Cut. And up here, there's a whole lot of Yakuza. Now, if you are a player who aims to hit Top Cut, you have to A, have a good sense of the decks that can do it. which isn't particularly difficult if you spend some time labbing and testing, like, oh yeah, Yakuza, Alfred, and Deeplands are pretty dominant. That makes sense. If you just, test it, play a couple games at locals, you'll probably see that these are kind of the strongest decks in the format. And B, planning around these decks. If play rate determines whether or not you have to learn the deck at all, the deck's conversion rate and how often they are topping should tell you how much you need to plan in depth, meaning time spent not just reading the cards, but also testing the matchup. For me, for example, I did not realize how bad the Magnolia Phantom versus Yakuza matchup would be because I just didn't manage to test it. Life gets in the way. So in my one Yakuza game of the tournament, I saw really ample pieces, the RNG wasn't really favored one way or another, and I just lost because I just wasn't familiar with the deck's ability to guard so thoroughly. And thus I picked the deck that just really cannot manage the matchup. Alongside a bad RNG check in round 1 against the deck with a pretty decent play rate in Youthberg, and I was just knocked out completely. That's how these things kind of coalesce into you losing a run completely, just not planning around things like play rate and both the win rates. That's not to say that a deck like a Magnolia can't top just because it is bad into one top deck. For example, we do actually have a Magnolia Phantom who made it all the way. Like this player here, this is their list, and it's very similar to the list I played, and by playing other high play rate decks in their matchup history, you can see they did manage to make it all the way to top 32 even though they faced a lot of really powerful decks that converted well. But you can also see that the Yakuza matchup is pretty bad. It worked for this player, who seems to know this deck can manage the rest of the threats in the format, but he did fold the moment that Kiryu hit the board. Thus, if you're a player that's looking to top, but also want to use a pet deck or a favorite deck like this person or me, which is pretty reasonable because in Vanguard, the gap in power between the best and the slightly weaker decks isn't too bad to the point where it's unwinnable. You do need to go in with the understanding that you have to dodge some bad matchups to get where you want to go. And you have to really work at learning the rest of the decks in the room. Go in depth with how you should play around or through Blaster Blade's early retire, or think about how you want to play the early game if you're forced to go second into Deeplands. It just won't be enough to just know each card individually like it will be for something like Overlord. You have to kind of test the matchup to know the little things. Here in top 8, obviously, you also kind of want to plan around, the decks that are topping in your deck teching. If you think that these are going to be important decks you find at really critical moments, you want every advantage you can have. So if you want to top, and you know that 7 out of the 8 decks have restand their attackers, maybe it's time to invest the 4 restand heals and just hope you don't see the Deeplands one-off. Or hope that your deck is enough to stop Deeplands even with basically minus 5k shield on all your heal triggers. The reason why I'm going over how you should prepare for decks and what are the things you want to look out for when you plan the decks you pick, and not telling you what deck you should pick, is because honestly, that's up to you. I'm not even gonna really pretend like every deck is made equal, but you can certainly top with less, common decks. You can see it right here in top 32. Pure Draconis has a top. After its nerf Rewinder got a top, hell, Daikaiser got a top. These are decks whose play rates don't indicate that they would top, but they do because players are good and invested time into learning matchups and the game. So when you choose your deck for whatever reason as you go into your next big tournament, and if you just want to do one game better than the last, or make top 32, or make top 8, or just win the entire thing, just do your testing and labbing with these parameters in mind. You don't need to over-prep for overhyped decks if you can identify that they're overhyped, and you just be pretty meticulous with these stronger decks. So, maybe spend less time thinking about Dragonic Overlord and how you want to handle a Soul Saver Dragon turn, for example. Maybe you really do want to see what are some of Rezial's weaker points. Are builds where they run the countercharger very common? There's a lot of different things you can do and learn, and how you can learn to kind of make the best line possible mid-game that will only come with meticulous testing, and you want to make sure that that meticulous testing is going to a deck that is in top cut, rather than a deck that is going into just a high play rate where you can kind of coast by on the fact that those decks won't actually be as powerful as people think they are. Okay, that is kind of just my opinion on how you want to prep for tournaments ahead. Everyone has their own little plans, but I hope this gives you a nice little field of reference or parameters as to the things you want to look out for in your future runs. I've left a link to this Excel in the description, so feel free to run it through yourself, look at what's really good this format. I think this format is pretty diverse. I think a lot of decks can top and do well, even if they're not exactly one of the Yakuza decks or an Alfred deck. I think there's a lot to do this format, and I think you should just try your best to, you don't have to play the best decks in the room, but if you want to innovate, I think this is a fine format to do that in. Okay? Now that that's done, let's go over some of the top decks. I won't go over every list, but I will go over some neat stuff. First of all, this is one of the Yakuza decks that won, this being the first place winner. It uses the Haruka right line, I believe it is, the grade 3 is Haruka, which searches your Persona ride really early. In this build, the deck has a lot of draw and filter. Alongside its Sephiroth Gila ride line means it doesn't need to discard for ride, so its hand size stays really healthy. This build in particular is on Drag Resonance, which when you restand your Vanguard gives 10,000 power to the front row, which isn't in every list, but it does improve the deck's ceiling. Most builds are on some kind of defensive Regalis, here it's Twin Cast, but I've seen Evergreen Transfer, just to bolster the defense of the many cards that also bind and give 10,000 to the Vanguard when he's attacked. So this way you can keep up the guard while you have an incredible offense. And while some of the tech is different here to there, for the most part, every Yakuza deck tends to be the one that swings once from the back row left with decent power, then the Vanguard twice, and then the sides, which are pretty chunky. The deck is consistent, it's hard to break through, and with the ability to sack games with 3 drives a turn, it's pretty strong. It's very threatening, and it's very easy to see why this deck is good. 100% if you are not playing Yakuza, you have to have a very good reason as to why, and even if the reason is something like, I want to have fun doing something else, that's fine too. But if you want to win, I really recommend learning this deck, and if you don't want to play this deck, but you still want to win, really look into this matchup, figure out some of the pain points and some of the turns you have to win on, or some of the turns that they're slightly weaker on, and just try and abuse those facts. Personally, I think that the original turn 3 isn't amazing. I think like the early game rush down strategy isn't ideal either. One of the best strategies in the room right now is to play Zerif Phantom, and Zerif Phantom with her shuffling a bunch of heal triggers back and multiple restand heals will be able to grind the deck out till that the Yakuza player has no deck left. So that might be a good angle to go for. I'm not saying every deck can do that, but I'm saying that is one of the ways you can do it and beat this matchup whilst playing a more fun, anime deck, something that's a bit more interesting maybe. Okay, let's move on. I just want to show you another Yakuza build. This one is on Evergreen Transfer over Twin Cast and doesn't have Drag Resonance, so you can see it's not really necessary to have that kind of ceiling raise. Evergreen Transfer has been picking up some notoriety for this deck because the conceit is that the deck is so strong that the only feasible way you lose is 2D Overtrigger. So just by playing Evergreen Transfer, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Next up we have Deeplands. Deeplands is the second place of the format. This is after its nerf, so this deck is still in a fine place. Instead of playing Harvest Elf, they play Roderick, who's down here, which is a card that I don't particularly like, nor do I think was going to be very good. But hey, clearly it is, and whatever works, it's hard to argue with results. Despite losing its Elf draw engine, the deck has not lost any ground. It has 6 attacks early still, the resource game is fine, and it's the only deck in the room that doesn't restand in order to attack, so it's the only deck in the room that trips those counter heals out. If you haven't learned this matchup, you gotta start. Start learning where to take points of damage and which are the easy damages to take. It's really difficult to kind of guard the center line, so I recommend trying to find the rear guard spot which is most comfortable for you to take that damage. The matchups aren't impossible, but you just have to be very wary about it. Personally, I don't even like Counterblast denying this deck. I think it just generates resources so well, even without the CB1 turn. So I would try and recommend away from that. But, in your testing, find out what your deck can do against this. And hey, if you bought the deck core, be proud, this deck still works. Okay, that's enough meta sheep. Here's something a little bit more interesting. Rezael. Rezael has 2 tops. And hey, no new form required. Just the toolboxing power of Orchids. Orchides? I'm not sure. This woman right here. With her at 4 copies, you can mill anything from your deck the moment she's placed. So you can cut down on some cards like Nilberis or Rifistra, which we only need to see like 1 or 2 of in a match. So we can improve our consistency at seeing those pieces and also our power, because instead of seeing these cards which are a little weaker at early points of the game, we can instead see Orchids, who is a 15k to 20k power, who also thins out 1 card and draws 1 card later on, and fills your soul to play a bunch of Disucssion Angels, so she's just a lot better than the other cards you could be running. Over here, Not Kavan's list goes way further into that toolboxing aspect. A ton of one-offs here with these 2 Nilberis hiding away, all just waiting to be milled from Orchides. Using stuff like Lien to bolster the early game, a bunch of great ones that can be called off Tranquilla, and you have a really solid deck. Do not sleep on Rezael this format. It may seem a little weird to still be playing a deck that needs to see Vita, who then needs to see another Rezael, etc, etc. But this deck is pretty potent. It's very skill testing in both your game plan, when you want to rip the Divine Skill, what are you milling of Orchides, and most of all, it's also in the deck building. These 2 builds are decently different. Plus with the anime notoriety, you're going to be seeing a lot of Rezael, so just plan around the deck a lot. Plan around its multi-crits, its 1 big Divine Skill triple drive, see what you can do about him. Now that space is a lot less tight with Orchides, they have running a lot of Disucssion Angels, and because they generate soul really quickly, they can also get the CC off her. So just be warned about that. They may have more CB at the ready than you think. Alright, now let's look at a real one. This is a deck I love. Let's look at Jiva. This deck is good, and it has been good since Ars Virina came out, and it keeps getting better. The problem with Jiva has always been that it's kind of tricky to pilot, but if you can do it, you will be rewarded greatly. This list, similar to the Reziel decks, is very heavy on the toolboxing with Ars Virina and Blessia, able to dig for your one-offs like Strau Virina and Vils Virina, who's super strong early. Hiding behind this bus over here is Blaze Maiden Ardally, who can hit really high shield values on your Trickstars while having some of the best and fastest offense in the game. The same, pain points apply to Jiva. Again, the deck is pretty piece reliant and can brick, but it's strong even then. If you're in the JP format, get used to seeing these cards a lot when Bhagavan comes out. I believe that's going to make the deck so much better than before, and we are going to see a really big Jiva resurgence. Skilled pilots are going to take this deck to incredible heights. That's how I feel about this deck. So start learning about it. Start making sure you don't give them like 4 damage so that Bor Virina can blast you on turn 3. It's happened to me before. It hurts. So yeah, just be careful. Now let's look at Leo Draconis. Now, I'm not going to say that this deck is cheap, but I will say that half the deck is like the deck set. It doesn't even use Animus. Having high PG counts in this format likely helps because a lot of the best decks have restanding Vanguards. Dragonic Overlord has a very high play rate. Yakuza has a restanding Vanguard. And we can look at the matchups that this player faced, and you can see that, yeah, it definitely probably helped in the Barracrea, the Kai, and the Barracrea matchups, respectively. Sorry, I said Barracrea twice, but they played 2 Barracrea. Did lose to the Yakuza, though, but maybe that's because they went second. And I think that shows that having a deck that handles these high play rate decks can actually get you to top finishes. Even though Barracrea isn't particularly strong, I would say, because, it didn't convert. So if that's your matchup was strong, then it isn't strong, right? But a lot of people were playing Barracrea, and Owen over here is rewarded because he runs into 2. So yeah, other than that, the deck has really solid ceiling, a pretty good resource game, but she's also a little bit challenging to pilot as well, but I'm sure she's worth the effort if you're an Amorta fan. Also, what a shiny list. Jesus, I'm blinded. Okay, now, Aichi Icon. Both the lists that I'm about to show you are Soul Saver pure. Basically just using Alpha for turn 3 and then finishing the game with Soul Saver Dragon. Over here you can see that cards like Zero and Ganslot make the kill turn really powerful, so you have to plan around those. It's one of the big reasons why you should be playing Restand Heals, right? Because Soul Saver Dragon is going to really knock your socks off without them. It's one of the highest play rate decks in the format with the conversion rate to match, meaning that this deck is probably really threatening. The right line as well is super solid. Both these lists today are on the Tranquilla right line, but honestly, all 3 of the Aichi right lines from Tranquilla, Marin, and Wingal are all pretty good. And Wingal gets a lot better once the new Akane cards come out. So I will be pretty worried about this deck going into the next format, and even now if you're still playing this format. Right line is great, resource game is crazy, really powerful stuff. Once more, this is a Mervin's list, a little bit higher on the generics with Disucssion Angel and Coco, but the idea is still the same. Soul Saver Dragon, Persona Ride into making a bunch of Zero Ganslot columns, and then just going to town and killing your opponent. Super cool stuff. If you're a fan of the original anime, this deck's for you. This is a real fun romp. I play a ton of Aichi-Con in my free time as well with my friends casually. It's really fun. I do recommend picking this up if you want a strong deck, you want an anime deck. This fulfills a lot of that criteria. Okay. Let's take a bit of a break from the powerful decks you expect and look at this Kairi list. As you can see on my right, this player has admitted to, how do you put it, a bit of a lucky run. But hey, top is the top. Vanguard is that kind of game. You can't really argue with the results. But maybe just take a quick look through if Kairi tickles your fancy. But this player does admit to a bit of a fraudulent run. But if the deck's not at least decent, no amount of frauding will get you there. Believe me, if that happened to me with Bruce, I don't think I would get all the way there too, so, have some pride in yourself, buddy. Not to be outdone by the rest of the metagame, Odium also has a pretty decent conversion rate. Now, this list doesn't really run stuff like Philia, instead using Shield Cyclers for stability, a very popular trend. The deck's kill turn is and always has been very potent and has the grind to back it up now with Animus. So make sure that whatever deck you choose is able to live a divine skill turn or can kill her before she sees it. You should be very concerned the moment you see the destined timepiece get set. This deck will punish you if you are not prepared. Finally, Langdemire Phantom. This is a deck that I thought wouldn't be very good on release, and I just consistently get proven wrong about it like a dummy. The deck has a really high ceiling with the 13 bind. It has great resource accumulation with Sargon and that new dragon that is basically Vejdrok Dragon for like rebuilding your boards. You should watch out for this one. It's not very popular now. If you look up like the prices, they don't really match what I think an anime deck of this much hype should have, which means it tells me that it's not very popular. And I think it is a bit underrated. He is very worth looking into though. I highly recommend Blancmire Phantom if you like Blancmire. Okay, that was most of the decks that I'm going to show here. Most of the decks that I could find as well. There's also an Eva top, and I know a lot of people do like Eva, and she did make top 16, I believe. And it's piloted by, I think, the best Eva player in Singapore. He's very well known for his Eva game. He's super skilled. He tops a ton of tournaments with Eva, and has been doing it ever since, you know, for as long as I can remember. He's a crazy player, and I'm not showing the deck image here because it is a tad bit provocative. He does have a very provocative mat that he laid the cards on, so I will not show it on screen now for fear of any, you know, YouTube being angry. But I will leave a link in the description below. And hey, you know, I mean, more power to you if you like that kind of thing, you know, go appreciate that, but not for the YouTube audience, I think. So that's that. I hope that this video is at least a little bit informative into how you may want to plan your tournament runs next time, or how you want to pick the decks that you play in your big tournaments. I know a lot of people have decision paralysis when it comes to this. Me too, all the time. It's a discussion that lots of top players have. People always report, you know, in their recounts of like how their tournament preparation goes, like, oh, I didn't know if I want to play a good deck or my comfort pick. These are all real considerations, and I hope that this kind of framework can help you in choosing those decks so that you can do just a little bit better in your next run. I hope that some of the tips I gave in kind of trying to identify what decks are going to be good helps. And I hope that you just like seeing all those deck lists. Those players who all top, you know, congratulations to them. They all played a great game. I played against the Yakuza. I played against a Yakuza who topped in like top 8. He was a good player. It was really cool to see all these players do well. Some of which, like, you keep seeing the same players at top cut, which kind of does show Vanguard has a pretty big skill element. Yeah, I just think the format is pretty good. I think maybe Yakuza's a bit of an outlier in terms of power, but nothing crazy, honestly. I think it's pretty manageable with something like Alfred. Honestly, pretty manageable with stuff like Serif. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what's the coolest deck you saw here, if you have any expectations for this metagame or the next one, or how you want to plan out your next tournament run. I'd like to hear what kind of strategies you have so that I can see your name in the top cut. And once you top, shout me out. I can only coach you. I can't play. Alright, that's it from me. Bye-bye. Thank you to my Ko-Fi supporters Big Ben, Lang Long, and Milk. Thanks for contributing to the Scraggy Fund. Great romp in the hay. This deck is really fun. That's not what romp in the hay means.